The morning he told me, I was standing at the kitchen window watching the first real snow of October move sideways across the fields. The wheat had been brought in weeks ago. The yard was beginning to disappear beneath it, the fence posts going first, then the path to the barn, then the color of everything, until the whole prairie outside the glass was one unbroken white from our property line to the horizon and beyond. My hands were in the dishwater, which was still warm, and my father's voice came from the doorway behind me in the particular tone he used when something had already been settled, when what followed was not a conversation, but an announcement. He said a name, a man from our church district, good family, well-managed land. He said it the way you might name a road you have already chosen to take, calmly, without looking for a reaction, because the road had already been chosen and the telling of it was merely a formality. I didn't turn around. I stood with my hands in the water and I thought about the 3 young men I had been getting to know over the past year and a half. 3 young men I had talked with for hours in the front room of our house, under the diffuse and careful attention of my family. 3 young men with whom I had allowed myself very quietly, in the way you are only permitted to allow such things when no one can see your face, to imagine something more. And none of that had mattered. Not one word of it. Not 1 hour of it. My name is not important yet. What matters first is the world I came from. I grew up in a small old colony Mennonite community in the flatlands of southern Saskatchewan, where the land runs to the horizon without interruption, and the rules that governed a girl's life were shaped something like that landscape, wide and featureless on the surface, and absolute in every direction you looked. This space, and the name I use here, Miriam, is where I say the things that could not be said inside that world. If you want to understand what life in a community like mine actually looked like from the inside, not the way outsiders imagine it, not the version that comes with folk art decorations and admiring documentaries, but the real interior of it, the parts that were never made visible, then subscribe right now, turn on your notifications, and stay with me. Because what I am about to tell you took a long time to be allowed to be said out loud, and I think it matters. I think it might be the thing you did not know you needed to hear. People who have no experience of conservative plain communities tend to imagine courtship inside them as something gentle and quaint. A young man in a clean Sunday shirt sitting across from a girl in a prayer covering, talking softly about harvests and faith, while the lamplight holds them in something that looks, from the outside, like a painting. And there is some of that. There has always been some of that. The surface of these things is easy to appreciate from a distance. It is the inside of them that takes more honest telling. Here is how it actually worked in the community where I grew up. A girl became eligible for courtship after her baptism, which in our community happened somewhere between the ages of 15 and 18. For me, it was 16. Baptism was the moment you formally entered the church as an adult member, the moment you submitted yourself to the Ordnung, the unwritten set of expectations that governed community life, from the hem of a dress to the order in which you greeted your elders after a Sunday service. Before baptism, you were a child in the care of your parents. After it, you were a woman, ready for service, ready for marriage, ready to step into the life that the community had already sketched out in front of you. Sunday evening youth gatherings were where the courtship began. The unmarried young people would assemble at a rotating host home after the evening service, boys and girls on separate sides of a long room, singing together from the Gesangbuch, the old German hymn book whose pages most of us knew by feel more than by reading. Low German was what we spoke at home, the language of kitchens and barns and daily work. High German was what we sang and prayed in. English was the language of the outside world, used when the outside world required it. If a young man wished to begin pursuing you, he would arrange to drive you home. A buggy ride on a flat gravel road in the dark. the prairie enormous and quiet around you, the stars very close overhead because there was nothing between you and them for miles in any direction. The ride might be 20 minutes. It might stretch to 40 if the conversation moved slowly, or not at all if it moved the other way, if something was there that made neither of you want to arrive quite yet. In that time, you were meant to get a sense of each other, whether there was anything worth pursuing, whether his silence was comfortable or merely empty. If there seemed to be something, he would begin visiting. Sunday evenings at your family's home, he would sit in the front room with you while a younger sibling invented a reason to move through the room at regular intervals, while your mother occupied a nearby chair with some mending she had already finished, while the family arranged itself around the two of you in a way that was not exactly supervision but was not exactly not supervision either. The visits were not private in any way that word means outside of a world like ours, but they were the closest thing to private that existed. They were what we were given, and for a long time I understood them as enough. This is what they called courtship. This is what I was given. The first young man came in the late autumn of my 17th year. He was the son of a farming family about 12 kilometers from ours, steady people, the kind whose name came up at community B's in connection with reliability and work ethic, which in our world was a recommendation of the highest order. He was quiet in the way that some people are quiet because they carry something large inside them that words cannot adequately approach. And others are quiet because there is simply not a great deal happening beneath the surface. I was not able to tell in those first weeks which kind he was. He gave me rides home from the Sunday gatherings 3 times. He visited 4 evenings. We talked about the harvest, about a wedding coming up in the community, about the cold snap that had been unexpected and had damaged some of what was left in the kitchen garden. He was polite. He was not unkind. But I noticed that he never asked me anything that required me to search for an answer, never said anything that surprised me, and I noticed, too, that I did not mind this as much as I perhaps should have, because I had not yet learned what it felt like when someone surprised you. I did not yet have the comparison to miss. On the 5th Sunday, he did not come. No message, no word of explanation sent through any of the ordinary channels. A week later, through the quiet but highly efficient network of women and cousins and neighbors that moves information through a community like ours with a speed that has nothing to do with technology, word arrived that he had begun visiting a girl from a neighboring district. That was the end of it. No parting conversation, nothing said to my face. He had simply directed his horse a different way one Sunday evening, and I was expected to understand this as a complete and sufficient answer. I did understand it. That was, I think, the most difficult part, that I understood it completely, that I had been prepared to understand it, that this kind of ending was so ordinary inside the world I lived in that there was no social language for it beyond the understanding itself. A door closes and you go on. If what I'm telling you here is reaching you in any way, I want to ask you to stay with this channel. Subscribe now, turn on your notifications, because this is only the beginning of what there is to say, and I am not going to stop saying it. There are so many more stories waiting. The second young man was different. He was warmer in the way that it takes a certain kind of courage to be warm inside a community like ours, where easy laughter could attract the quiet concern of the deacons, where a man who seemed too comfortable was sometimes regarded as not quite serious enough about the work of living a faithful life. He had a laugh that arrived without announcement, real and uncalculated, and I liked it in the instinctive way you like a thing before you have had the chance to decide whether you are allowed to. He listened differently, too. He leaned forward when something interested him, elbows settling onto his knees, the way a person positions themselves when they have decided that what you are saying is worth their full attention and they are willing to demonstrate that with their whole body. We talked about faith, first carefully, then less carefully. We talked about what it felt like to hold a belief with your entire chest, and also, sometimes, in the very same moment, to wonder about it. I had never said any of this out loud to anyone. There was no one inside the community to say it to, no space in which such things were permitted to be said, and I had carried it for years as a private uncertainty I assumed was a flaw in me, rather than a sign of anything worth paying attention to. Saying it to him and having him say something similar back, differently worded but recognizably the same shape, was one of the stranger and more clarifying experiences of my young life. He visited 6 Sundays, then 7. On the 8th, I had begun to let myself very carefully, in the small and private way that you permit yourself to imagine things when you know the stakes of imagining wrong, to wonder whether these evenings in the front room might be the beginning of the life that was coming toward me. My mother noticed. Mothers in our world developed a particular kind of peripheral attention for these things. They watched without appearing to watch, noted without appearing to note. She began asking questions that were not quite questions. Had I thought about what it would mean to keep a house on land that size? Did I know how his mother organized her kitchen through the canning months? I knew what she was asking. I answered honestly and kind, but my father had also been watching, and my father had reached a different conclusion. Here is what people outside communities like mine almost never understand about courtship within them. The girl is not the only one choosing. The young man is not the only one deciding. The families are also in the process of evaluating, and the community is evaluating in the way that communities do, through memory and reputation and the slow accumulation of opinion that passes from household to household, across the winter and the spring, like weather crossing the prairie, arriving before you can see it coming. A father watches a young man at community bees, at harvests, at the ordinary accumulated labor of shared life. He listens to what the minister says about a family's standing. He considers land and debt and the particular quality of a man's character under difficulty. He thinks about what his daughter's nature requires and whether this young man's nature will be good for her over the long measure, and whether what looks to an 18-year-old girl like warmth and attentiveness will look the same after 20 years of weather and hardship and the daily friction of two people trying to build something. He is not wrong to think about those things. I have had to sit with that truth for a long time, alongside the other truth. He was not wrong to consider them. He was wrong to consider them alone, and to act on them alone, and to inform me only of what had already been decided, as though my own consideration of my own life was not a necessary part of the process. The second young man's visits stopped in November. My father had spoken to his family. The visiting was no longer appropriate, I was told, and that was all I was told. When I asked, once, what had concerned him, my father looked at me with the particular patience of someone who finds the question slightly beside the point, because the answer is obvious to them, and obvious answers require no explanation. He said, "I have more years than you do. I can see what you cannot see yet." He believed it completely. He was not saying it to wound me. He was stating what was, within his framework, simply a fact. His judgment about my life was his God-given responsibility. His faith told him that my own judgment about my own life was something I would grow into after marriage, after children, after the years had shaped me properly. He was not being cruel. He was being faithful to a system that had never asked him to question the distance between faithfulness to the system and faithfulness to his daughter, and so he could not feel that distance. I felt almost nothing else. The third young man I want to tell about carefully. He is the one that still costs me something to talk about even now. He came in the spring of my 18th year. He was older than the others, 23 to my 18, and he worked with wood. Furniture mostly, the kind of furniture that people in our community passed down rather than replaced, That had the quality of something made by someone who understood the difference between a thing that would last and a thing that merely appeared solid until it was tested. He came the first evening with nothing in his hands, just himself. He sat across from me in the front room and he asked me what I thought about. Not about farming, not about the community calendar or the spring planting or who had been unwell over the winter. He asked me what I thought about when I had a moment to myself, when my hands were occupied and my mind was free. No one had ever asked me that. I didn't have an answer ready because answers to questions like that are not something you keep prepared when no one has ever indicated they wanted one. I had to stop and actually look for it, somewhere inside me where I had kept such things without knowing they were worth keeping, without knowing that anyone was ever going to ask. He waited. He was very good at waiting. Not the waiting of someone with nothing else to say, but the waiting of someone who has decided that what you are working toward is worth the time it needs to arrive in. I could feel the difference. We talked for nearly 3 hours that first evening. My younger sister fell asleep on the bench in the corner at some point. The lamp had burned low. Neither of us had noticed either of those things happening, and when I noticed them both at once, the sleeping sister and the low light, something about that felt like an answer in itself, though to exactly what question I could not yet have said. He came back. Spring became summer, and he kept coming. We talked about faith in the way that is only possible with someone who shares your entire foundation and your entire language, but not entirely your certainty, and who is honest enough to say so, carefully, with a kind of respect for the difficulty of the questions themselves that felt different from the way such questions were typically handled in our world, which was to answer them quickly and completely with the church's answer and consider the matter settled. With him, the questions were allowed to be hard. The sitting with them was allowed to be the point. I began to understand what it might mean to be known by someone. Not the capable version of you, not the obedient version, not the version that performed well inside the community's expectations, the one that thought about things in the quiet, the one that existed when no one needed anything from you, the one that had been in there the whole time, unasked about, waiting. My mother hoped. I could feel it in her, carefully held. She was not a woman who let hope make itself too visible before a thing was certain, but it was there. This time, I think she hoped alongside me. My father was watching too. In August, on a Wednesday evening, my father asked me to come into the front room. Not a Sunday, not a visiting evening. A Wednesday, which meant it was not the beginning of something, but the close of something that had already been decided somewhere I had not been included. He sat in his chair. My mother was in the kitchen behind me. I could hear her moving things quietly, slowly, in the particular way she moved when she was listening and needed not to appear to be. He told me that a man from our district, not the first young man, not the second, not the third, had come to speak with him, had expressed his intention formally. This man was 32. I was 18. He had land that was well managed and debt-free. He had a character my father had observed over many years of working alongside him at bees and at harvest, and at the accumulated ordinary labor of community life. He had a family that was respected and a faith that no one had ever had reason to question. My father had given the man his blessing. I remember the quality of the stillness in the room around me, the clock on the mantel, the sound of something shifting in the barn outside, my own breathing, which I became suddenly and strangely conscious of, as though it had become a thing that required deliberate effort to continue. I asked if I had a choice. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said that of course I had a choice, that no woman in our community was compelled into marriage, that the church did not permit that. But he said it in the voice of a man who had already arranged the world into the shape of the answer he was expecting. I was 18 years old and baptized. I was a full member of the church. The alternative to marrying within the community was the ban, excommunication, the withdrawal of fellowship, the closing of every door in every house I had ever loved. My mother's voice on the other side of a wall that would not open for me anymore. My sisters' faces turned in a different direction. The community's silence settling around you like a permanent winter. Every familiar road suddenly belonging to someone else. I said yes. Not with joy, not with the slow, accumulating certainty I had felt on those summer evenings when someone had waited in patient silence for me to find the words for what I thought about, when I had a moment to myself. With the particular kind of yes that is not really agreement, the yes that means I see the shape of the space I am standing inside. I cannot find a door, and so I am using the word that makes this situation resolve, because it is the only word available to me that does not cost more than I currently have the capacity to pay. I want to tell you what came after, because the after is part of the truth too, and it does not get told as often. The man my father chose was not cruel. The marriage was not violent. He was exactly what my father had assessed him to be: steady, hard-working, faithful, respected by everyone who knew him. He was also someone I did not know, a stranger I was expected to live alongside and learn to love in the way that many in our community believed love properly worked, that it grew from commitment rather than arriving before it, that the feelings would follow the vows if the vows were taken seriously enough. Perhaps that is sometimes true. I cannot speak for everyone. I can speak only for myself, which is that in the first year of that marriage, I stood many mornings at the window above a kitchen sink that was not my mother's kitchen, in a house I had not chosen, in a future I had not been permitted to imagine on my own terms. And I tried to locate in my chest the feeling I had carried through that summer. The feeling of being asked what I thought about when I had a moment to myself. The feeling of someone leaning forward with their whole body toward whatever I was about to say, waiting without impatience, because they had decided my words were worth the time they needed to arrive. Those feelings had not come into the marriage with me. They had been left behind somewhere, in a room where the lamp had gone low without either of us noticing, in a version of a life that had been closed before I understood it well enough to fight for it, or even to name it as something worth fighting for. I want to pause here and say this directly. If any part of what I'm telling you is landing somewhere in you that recognizes itself, please subscribe, turn on your notifications, and share this with someone who might need to hear it. These stories matter because the people inside them mattered, and too little has ever been said honestly and without decoration about what it actually felt like to live this way. Come back. Stay with this. Years later, in therapy, I encountered a word I had never heard spoken inside the community I grew up in: agency. The experience of being the actual author of your own life, not simply the one who speaks, but the one who determines the direction. Not just the one who opens her mouth, but the one who freely chooses what comes out of it, from a set of options that is genuinely open, in a room where the architecture around her is not already pointing toward a predetermined answer. I had not had that. Not in the way the word means when someone who has studied it carefully sits across from you and asks you to really think about what it would have required. My yes was real, in the sense that I had opened my mouth and made the sound, but the baptism and the ban, and my father's authority and the community's expectations, and my own inability, at 18, to imagine any life outside the only one I had ever been shown, all of that meant the yes was never entirely mine. It was shaped by forces much larger than a girl standing in a front room on a Wednesday evening, and those forces had been at work for years before that night arrived. I do not say this to condemn my father. I have worked too long and paid too much to arrive at a place where I can hold him clearly, and I am not going to flatten him now. He loved me in the only framework his life had ever offered him for what love required. He believed his authority over the shape of my future had been given to him by God, and that belief was genuine, and that love was genuine, and he exercised them both with what he understood as care. He was not performing faithfulness. He was a man inside a system, doing what the system asked of him and believing completely that his faithfulness to the system was faithfulness to his daughter. Unable to feel the distance between those two things because the system had never asked him to look for it. The cost of that faithfulness was mine to carry. It has always been mine. He has not had to carry it. If you grew up somewhere that made decisions about your life before you were old enough, or free enough, or informed enough to make them yourself, I see you. If someone loved you in a framework so complete that their love and your limitation were the same gesture, the same reaching hand, I see you too. You are not wrong for having wanted more than you were given. You are not faithless for having noticed the walls. You were a person. A full person with an interior that was always worth asking about, even when no one asked. The fact that no one asked is not evidence that there was nothing there. There was always something there. The community I came from gave me things I still carry and will carry for as long as I live. It gave me the knowledge of what it means to belong to something larger than yourself, deeply, with real texture, with people who would appear without being summoned at any difficulty and stand with you in it. It gave me faith, even though the faith I hold now is in different hands than the ones I was given it in, at a different distance, with more questions allowed inside it. It gave me the capacity to work in silence for long hours at something hard and find something close to peace in the doing of it. But it did not give me my own voice. I had to find that myself. I had to take it, carefully, at real cost, over a long time. The cost was genuine. There are things I had to leave behind that I still grieve in the way you grieve something that was genuinely good, even though it could not hold you. The grief is not simple, and I'm not going to pretend it is. And I would walk that road again. Every step of it. Because it brought me here. Here, where I can say what I actually think. Here where I no longer have to wait for someone to ask me what I thought about when I had a moment to myself, because I have been saying it out loud for long enough that the words come before anyone has to invite them. Here, where the yes I say is mine, shaped by nothing but my own judgment and my own voice and whatever I have learned about what I want my life to hold. There's so much more still to tell. The full architecture of a life inside a world like that one. The ways it forms you and the ways it costs you. The ways it holds you and the ways the holding becomes the problem. I am not finished. Come back. Bring someone who needs to hear this. And until next time, be careful with your yeses. Know which ones are really yours. That knowledge, once you find it, might be the thing that saves you.